Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and back in 2015, I did a video with some of the guys over at TFB TV, who are no longer with TFB TV actually, but Alex and Patrick and Nathaniel over there, and we had actually gone to do a video, a really cool video it turned out, on shooting an original 276 Pedersen toggle-locked rifle. But since we were all there together, we figured, well, let's see if we can get some other neat stuff filmed. And one of the things that came out of that was a four-way video about what guns do we not like. And my answer at the time was, I don't like the H&K 91 or the G3. Well, today we're taking a look at my own G3, my customized G3 that I have put together well after that video came out. And this is a rifle that has really changed my mind about the potential of the roller locked system and the G3 in general. Now, what I originally didn't like about the G3, which I still don't like about the stock HK91, is, well, there's several factors. One of them is the controls. The controls are definitely not ambidextrous friendly, not left-hander friendly. In particular, the charging handle, which really is obnoxious for a left-hander. The weight, the length of pull especially, and a sort of a combination of the handling and the recoil of the rifle, which is made relatively poor by what I think in retrospect was a really bad design of stock. Now I understand kind of why they did the stock this way, and we'll talk about this in a moment when we take a closer look at this rifle, but the stock really does unfortunate things to the handling of the G3, and they're things that we can fix now, which is really cool. And then also I didn't like the trigger. HK91s tend to have just bad, squishy, heavy triggers. So I was able to fix basically all of that with this rifle. It was put together for me by a company called Brethren Arms, who are no longer in business. It was a little family company, two brothers, hence the name, up in Utah that did roller-locked stamped receiver builds. So they did 300 blackout, they did 308, they did, I think, 5.56, 9mm. And I arranged for them to build me this particular rifle. So this is a G3 parts kit with a receiver that Brethren made. And they were willing to make one particular change to the gun that I really wanted, and that was to swap the charging handle to be left-handed instead of right-handed. Let me show you how they did that. It's actually a really simple thing. Essentially, all you have to do is change the locking notch on what looks like it ought to be the gas tube, would be the gas tube if the G3 had a gas system, the charging handle tube, that runs above the barrel. So the way that the charging handle works on a G3, if you haven't seen one up close, is the bolt has a forward extension that comes to right here, and then it just ends. And sitting in front of it is a separate component that is just basically a plug that runs in this tube with a handle on it that you can use to push the bolt carrier back. So there is absolutely no modification to the bolt carrier in order to do this. Instead, the only thing you have to actually accommodate is how the rifle locks in the open position. So on a standard G3, that's over on this side. It's this cutout, just located over here. So what Brethren did was simply weld up the locking notch on the one side and replace it with just cut the locking notch on the other side. This is a totally standard charging handle that if it were rolled 90 degrees over to the other side of the rifle, it would look perfectly normal, and it's interchangeable and works just fine in a left-handed configuration. So this is a permanent change that has to be done, and it's really something that has to be done before the gun is built, before this tube is attached to the receiver. But beyond that, it's a fairly easy thing to do. Now, I have also made a second little change here, and that is we put on the charging handle from an HK23 light machine gun instead of a standard G3 charging handle. And we did that just to get a little more leverage. So there's a G3 handle for comparison. This HK23 one is a lot bigger and just gives you a lot more purchase for operating the rifle. That takes care of the charging handle. The magazine release is ambidextrous to begin with. This is a paddle, does have the paddle style mag release on it, which is nice, that's what I wanted. And then that leaves the safety lever which needs to be made ambidextrous, which actually isn't that big of a deal. There are companies that make ambidextrous selector levers for the G3, and so I have one of those installed, and you can see that from a firing grip I can just barely reach this thing with my thumb and not have to break my firing grip, and that was the goal. Now the trigger mechanism inside has been worked over by a guy named Bill Springfield. I'm honestly not sure if he still does this sort of work, but it's not an AR match grade trigger, but it's a heck of a lot better than a stock G3 trigger. And it's nice enough that it's not a big deal to me anymore. You know, there are triggers that could be better, but this brings it up to the level of totally acceptable and great compared to a stock G3. This is an old grungy surplus part, but we also replaced the grip, and I actually did this relatively recently because the standard G3 has this thumb rest for your thumb if you're right-handed, and if you're left-handed it's just an annoying protuberance in the grip. So I replaced that with Magpul's new polymer lower for the G3, which is nicely not right-handed only. It's just a nice grip, good grip angle, good texturing, works great. And it fits with my trigger and ambidextrous selector there. I'll point out Magpul puts the full auto markings on this trigger housing, but it is not, in fact, a full auto rifle. It's just a semi-auto. And I can't even put the selector up into full auto position. It's safe or semi. Brethren also went ahead and welded a Picatinny rail onto the receiver as part of the manufacturing process. That is definitely the best way to mount optics on a G3, and it works great. Now, at the moment, I have an Aimpoint Comp M4, a plain old red dot on there. This is certainly a rifle that could take advantage of magnified scope. The only issue I have, I've tinkered with it a little bit, it has to be a scope that's short enough that it doesn't interfere with the charging handle up here. So I juggled different optics on this rifle periodically. But the red dot is nice. I think there are people who assume that a 308 has to have a magnified scope for long range. It really doesn't. A red dot can work just fine on a 308. Now you'll notice that I have removed the rear sight. And that's because with the stock that I'm using, the rear sight really isn't usable. Or I'm not going to use it. You can if you need to. So this is a stock by Spuhr, which I've talked about before. This was developed for the military in Sweden, and it's also used by a number of other militaries who are still using the G3. And what this does is fix so many of the problems with the original G3 handling. So for a point of comparison, here's an original G3 stock. And if I line this up on the rifle, you can see that the length of pull here is like 2 inches longer than I have the Spuhr set up to be. Now the Spuhr stock can adjust in and out telescopes, but I like it all the way in. And then the other thing about the original G3 stock is it's got this hump right here at the back. And the idea was, in order to keep the iron sights relatively low on the receiver, we're going to drop the line of the stock so that your face comes down lower to get a nice sight picture. The problem is, in order to make this work, you have to both extend the length of pull, as they did, so that your face doesn't hit this lump. And frankly, your face still does usually hit this lump unless you hold the gun deliberately, uncomfortably, sort of at a distance and deliberately bring your face back here. What Spuhr's stock has done is raise the cheek weld up substantially. So again, there's the height comparison. This has raised the cheek weld at least an inch, if not more. And that puts it perfectly in line to use an optical sight and not pound your face on the back of the receiver. At the same time, it shortens the length of pull, which makes the whole gun feel lighter. It really just does wonders for the G3. They are painfully expensive stocks, but I find them fantastic. And any G3 that I plan to actually shoot seriously, that I didn't want to keep in some alternative historical configuration, I would absolutely put one of these on. I have also put on one of Spurs Handguards. although I don't have a whole lot of specific use for this. It is actually lighter than most of the factory G3 handguards, which I think is a little surprising to some people. It's aluminum, it's well ventilated, it helps cool the barrel. I put a little piece of rail here so that I can stick a bipod on this. The handguard is basically free-floated, and so a bipod can be a nice accessory, although I don't have it on at the moment. Definitely something that would be more useful if I had a magnified optic on there. I have a standard G3 muzzle brake on there at the moment. There's certainly a gazillion different options for muzzle devices. I've found that, well, I find muzzle brakes to be obnoxious, and I don't like putting them on guns that I own. I could set this up for a suppressor. I've actually done that a little bit here and there. That makes it a bit front heavy. Generally speaking, just the plain standard flash hider works just fine for me, so that's what I tend to leave on there. So there's my G3, the rifle that made me really actually reconsider the qualities of the G3 HK roller lock platform in general. Once I took care of all of the ergonomic issues around the core mechanism, I found that I really liked it. It's a tremendously reliable rifle. It's a nice accurate rifle. And with this setup, it's actually a fairly soft shooting rifle, certainly far better than a stock G3. So let's actually take a look at that. Let's head out to the range with it now. All right, I used to not be a big fan of G3s, as I've said. This one kind of changed my mind on it. The Spuhr stock in particular. Only had a few in that magazine, but I believe the other one is full and also steel. So what the Spuhr stock really lets me do is it brings the axis of recoil right in line with the shoulder pad, so the gun doesn't jump as much, and it lets me come way farther forward than I would be able to with the original stock. The old stock, the length would be like that, if not longer. And then you have your cheek farther down and you're just hitting your face into this hump on the back of the receiver. And this stock does a fantastic job of solving all of those problems at once. And I just leave it compressed all the way in, bring my nose, almost a nose to charging handle style of hold. The ambidextrous safety obviously is nice, and I can actually operate it with my thumb. I've got the Magpul grip on there, which is nicer than the originals because the originals have a thumb rest on them, which is naturally designed for right-handers, not left-handers. And around. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I have truly come around on G3s, largely because of this very fun little rifle. Thanks for watching.